Hi, I'm Marlene. My parents used to say I was the strong one, the one who didn't need help, who could figure it out on her own. But then, they bought my brother a franchise. With money they told me didn't exist when I asked for a chance. They even used my name to open accounts, behind my back. And when I said no, they made sure the world knew I was the ungrateful daughter. But what hurts more than betrayal is realizing it wasn't a one-time thing. What if your family spent years quietly rewriting your story until you didn't recognize yourself in it anymore? Would you speak up or keep pretending it was love? I was sitting in my parents' living room, sunlight falling in from the half-closed blinds like it always had. Soft, scattered, making everything feel deceptively peaceful. I had rehearsed what I wanted to say at least 50 times on the drive over, but nothing prepared me for how quickly my voice would feel useless once I was there. I've been working on a proposal for a boutique consulting firm, I began, keeping my tone measured. Small business clients, mid-market strategy, something I know I can make work. I just need help with the startup costs, not a loan, a backing. My mother didn't even look up from the rim of her coffee mug. "You're strong, Marlene," she said with that kind of smile that stretches but doesn't warm. "You don't need us for this. You've always figured it out. Your brother, he's different. He needs structure, support. You need to learn the hard way." The words didn't surprise me. Not really. But they still landed like they were aimed. Velma had said variations of that sentence since I was 12. The version where the hard way was character building, as if hardship were some twisted rite of passage handed down to daughters so they'd stop asking. I glanced at my father, Gideon, sitting across the room with his newspaper halfway folded in his lap. He didn't say anything. He never did in these moments. His silence was as consistent as the ticking clock on the wall behind him. The longer I sat there, the more invisible I felt, not dismissed, disregarded. They hadn't even asked to see the proposal. By the time I stepped out to the porch, my chest was tight, like my ribs had forgotten how to move. I rested my hand on the railing, took in the same street I grew up on, and just like that, the past found its way back. It was summer. I was 10. The driveway had been burning hot under my bare feet as I watched Dorian unwrap the red bike we had both asked for. I had begged. For weeks. We both needed a way to get to school, but I was told girls should walk. That bikes were for boys who'd grow into men who'd need to learn mobility and independence. I would, Velma assured me, one day marry someone who had a car. So what was the point? That afternoon, I walked behind Dorian as he sped off down the road with a grin so wide it nearly wrapped around his head. He didn't even look back. I walked for the next 3 years. That bike sat in the garage most days after the first month. Flat tire, broken chain, whatever excuse it needed to turn into rust. Just like the promises they made. To be fair, to treat us equally, to care. Back in the present, I stepped into the kitchen to rinse a glass. The sun had shifted, casting shadows through the trees outside. Gideon was still in his chair, flipping through another page of the paper like nothing in the last hour meant anything at all. "So?" I asked, not bothering to soften my voice. "Dorian screwed up again?" He nodded without looking at me. "It's harder for him, Marlene. He wasn't built for the hard way like you were." That's what they always said when he failed, that he needed grace, that life had been unfair to him, that he hadn't been ready. But me? I'd been born ready, apparently. I didn't respond. I didn't argue. I just rinsed the glass slowly and placed it on the drying rack, like that conversation hadn't just confirmed everything I'd feared for years. It was never about fairness. It was about where they thought the value lived, and it had never lived in me. Later that night, I sat in my car, parked in the driveway for longer than I needed to. Engine off, hands on the steering wheel, breathing in and out like I was trying to prove to myself that I still had control. I wasn't crying. I wasn't angry. I was done. This wasn't the first time they chose him, but it would be the last time I let them make me believe that wasn't a choice. Some people grow up learning how to belong. Others, like me, learn how to disappear without ever leaving the room. The irony? That red bike never went anywhere. Just like their hope that I'd eventually fall in line stayed exactly where they left it, sitting in the garage, collecting dust. The sound of my turn signal echoed in the quiet cabin of my car as I merged onto the freeway. I wasn't sure where I was headed. Home, probably. But I wasn't in a rush to get there. Not after the conversation that had just gutted whatever scraps of expectation I had left for my parents. I pulled into a gas station to grab something cold. I needed a break from thinking, needed air, needed anything but more silence. Back in the office the next morning, I slid into the break room, hoping for a little mindless chatter, maybe a coffee refill, nothing else. But instead, I caught my colleague Josh scrolling through a local business blog. "Hey," he said casually, "isn't your brother Dorian? He's in this article. Says here he just launched a gourmet chicken franchise out near South Park." I blinked once, twice. My hand hovered above the coffee pot like my brain was buffering. "What?" I finally asked, even though I heard every word. Josh turned the screen toward me. There was Dorian's name in bold, beside a press photo of him cutting a ribbon, with both my parents flanking him like proud campaign donors. The headline read, "Local Family Invests in Son's Franchise Dream." I didn't say another word. I nodded and left the room. The hallway outside suddenly felt too narrow, like the walls were folding in on me. I pulled out my phone and searched the article myself. There it was again. The same names, same smiles, same caption. "Proud to invest in the future of our family name." Funny. When I had pitched them my business plan 6 months earlier, they told me they couldn't afford to help anyone right now, that they were tightening up, being cautious, that I should take it as a compliment, because I was independent, because I didn't need anyone. But clearly, they had the money. And clearly, they had a favorite. The anger didn't come all at once. It trickled in slowly, like a faucet you don't realize is leaking until it soaks the floor beneath you. Later that week, while organizing some old files on my laptop, I stumbled across a folder labeled NYC Internship, 2014. I hadn't opened it in years. Inside was a saved email thread. Back then, I had received an unpaid internship offer from a human rights nonprofit in Manhattan. It was a golden opportunity. Prestigious, promising, a foot in a door I had dreamed of walking through. I had emailed Mom that night asking for $1,500, just enough to cover the deposit on a sublet and train fare. Not a gift, just a hand to steady me. She replied the next morning, "If you can't make it on your own, maybe you're not ready. Life doesn't hand you comfort, it hands you tests. Learn to stand before you try to run." I never replied, never asked again, and I turned that offer down like I wasn't grieving it. But the truth? That email sat like a stone on my chest for years. Scrolling Facebook one evening, I caught sight of a new photo uploaded by my cousin's wife. A dinner party, long table, string lights, dressed-up plates. I spotted Dorian first, then my parents, then neighbors from the old block. They were celebrating his new venture. There was a caption, "A night to honor Dorian's next big step. Couldn't be prouder of this family." My name wasn't in any tag. I hadn't been invited, hadn't even been told it was happening. But there was my father, smiling wide, holding up what looked like a large ceremonial check, one of those ridiculous props used at galas. My mother had her hand on his shoulder. I stared at the screen until my vision blurred. Not from tears, from disbelief that I still thought any of this could be different. Back at my apartment, the lights were off. I didn't bother turning them on. I sat at my kitchen table, opened my laptop, and started a blank document. My fingers hovered over the keys for a moment. Then I typed, "They told me no," not because they couldn't, but because they didn't want to. I minimized the document and pulled up the email from Mom, the one where she told me to figure it out. I took a screenshot, then another of the article, then one of the Facebook photo. I created a new folder on my desktop, Receipts. I wasn't planning to do anything with them, not yet. But the story was changing, and I needed to remember what was real. See, This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't poor communication or differing values. This was strategic. It was premeditated, practiced, passed down like a family recipe no one ever questioned, and I wasn't going to forget it. I didn't open the folder again after that night. Didn't need to. The images were burned in. The check. The headline. The look on my father's face like he had just passed down a legacy. 3 days later, on a Friday, I was sitting at my desk finishing up quarterly reports when my phone buzzed. Voicemail from Velma. Her tone was clipped, not cold, just businesslike, the way she always sounded when she was about to say something manipulative and pretend it was affection. Come home Sunday for dinner, just us. Your brother will be there. He wants to thank you. There was no mention of what I had done to warrant thanks. No sign this was meant to be anything but another setup. But I saved the voicemail anyway, because instinct told me I might need it. I stared at my screen for a few minutes after, running over the invitation again and again in my mind. The last time I'd sat across from them, I walked away feeling like an outsider in my own family. And yet, a part of me still wondered, stupidly, if this time might be different. I didn't believe it, but I needed to see it play out, if only to stop myself from imagining any alternate ending. Sunday came faster than I expected. I left my apartment early, telling myself I'd only stay an hour, maybe 2. Charlotte hadn't changed. Same trimmed hedges, same forced pleasantries on front lawns, same uneasy familiarity. I parked by the curb and sat for a minute before heading to the door. The porch light was already on, though it wasn't yet dark. When Velma opened the door, she didn't hug me, just nodded and said, "We're starting soon, come in." Inside, the living room had been rearranged. A rented dining table extended across the space, set with candles and wine glasses. There were people I hadn't seen in years. Neighbors, a few folks from Dorian's college days, even a local news anchor. I realized then it wasn't dinner. It was a celebration. A table card labeled "Reserved for Investors" sat dead center. My name wasn't anywhere. Velma handed me a plastic plate. "There's seating over by the hallway. We ran out of chairs." No apology. No effort to make it less awkward. I carried the plate like a waitress at someone else's party and sat on a folding chair between a potted plant and the coat rack. From there, I watched Dorian make a toast with our father beside him, grinning like they'd just closed a billion-dollar deal. "Couldn't have done this without the people who believe in me," Dorian said. "Some folks in this room took a risk on me, and I won't let them down." Cheers. I didn't drink. After dessert and a slideshow of his entrepreneurial journey, people started mingling. That's when Gideon came over, all casual, like we were just catching up. "You have a minute?" he asked, already turning toward the kitchen. I followed, mostly to get away from the noise. He waited until the door closed behind us before he said it. "There's something we need to talk about. It's not about tonight. It's about what comes next." Here it was. Dorian's had some unexpected issues with the accounting side of the business, he continued, eyes avoiding mine. "Nothing catastrophic, just a bump. The bank wants a secondary signer to restructure the franchise loan. It's a technicality, you just need to—" "Use my credit," I finished. He gave a helpless laugh. "You've got excellent credit, Marlene. You've always been stable. This is just helping your brother clear a hurdle." Velma stepped into the room, like she had been waiting outside for her cue. "He needs this. You can do it. That's how families get through things, together." I took a deep breath, looked them both in the eye, and for once, I didn't blink first. "You invited me here to ask for a signature, not a seat, and that tells me exactly where I stand." Velma's smile froze. Gideon rubbed his forehead like I was giving him a migraine. "She's being dramatic again," Velma said, turning away. "This isn't about favoritism." No, it never was. It was about convenience. I left before anyone could notice I was gone. Didn't bother saying goodbye. The night air felt like a relief, like stepping out of a room with too many lies and too little oxygen. The drive back took longer than it should have. I took the long way, past the school I used to walk to, past the grocery store I'd worked at weekends, past the garage where that red bike had stayed untouched for years. No music, just the wind and the hum of the tires. I didn't feel hurt, I felt clarity. They hadn't changed. I had just finally stopped translating their actions into something softer. I wasn't going to argue anymore. I wasn't going to beg them to see me. They made it clear. They fed him steak and poured wine for his future. I brought my own water and left with my dignity. I slept hard that night. Not the peaceful kind, but the kind your body forces when it's exhausted from staying polite too long. I didn't dream, and when I woke up, the sunlight was already pouring in. My phone had 5 missed calls. 3 were from Velma, 1 from my father. The last was unknown, probably her calling from the landline for emphasis. I let them go to voicemail. The first one was short and sweet. "We love you, Marlene. Just think about it, okay?" The second one had more bite. "If you're going to throw away everything we built as a family, that's on you." And the last? It stung in the way only Velma could manage. "You've always had a problem thinking you're better than us. Maybe that's the real issue." I played them once, saved them, then tossed the phone across the couch. I didn't need more of the same. What I needed was a reminder of why I had said no in the first place. I went to the hallway closet, pulled out a box I hadn't touched since moving. Inside was the notebook, old, soft at the corners, full of coffee stains and hopes that didn't make it past senior year. I flipped through pages filled with late-night ideas, sticky notes with questions I never asked anyone, graphs drawn in pencil that had faded but not disappeared. Then I found it. Family-owned hospitality model. My name in the top corner. Date: March 14th, 2015. The outline. The projections. The brand identity work I'd done between bartending shifts and econ exams. The same model Dorian was now bragging about on a podcast I hadn't even known existed until last night. I'd been at a networking mixer when I overheard it. Some guy in a blazer talking too loudly to impress the woman beside him had pulled up a clip on his phone. "My franchise is based on a model I built from scratch, targeting family-centric loyalty," Dorian said through the phone speaker. My stomach didn't drop, my chest didn't tighten. That would have been too generous. Instead, I felt cold. Not surprised, just confirmed. Word for word. He didn't even change the tagline. I watched them all laugh at his entrepreneurial spirit. None of them knew they were praising something stolen. Worse, I didn't even think he knew it was mine. That's how deep the dismissal went. They hadn't just taken my work. They'd passed it off as his because, in their eyes, I didn't own it in the first place. That night, I poured a glass of water, set it on my desk, and called my father. He picked up after 2 rings. "Mar," he said, like nothing had happened. "You okay?" "No," I replied, "but I'm getting there. Did you read the cover page before you gave him that business model?" He paused. "Too long." He needed something to pitch with. You were already stable. He wasn't. We just wanted to give him a chance." "You gave him my chance," I said, calm but exact. "You used what I built to save his face, and now you want to use my silence to keep it all neat. I'm done with neat." He sighed. "You always make things more complicated than they have to be." No, they just hated when things became honest. After we hung up, I pulled out my scanner. I digitized the original notebook page, attached timestamps, watermarked it, and uploaded a copy to my drive. I didn't plan on suing, but I wanted it saved. Real, mine. I printed a clean copy and slid it into an envelope addressed to a legal contact, someone I trusted to hold it for me if needed. They thought I was the backup plan. They thought if Dorian failed, I'd quietly step in, clean up, and be too tired to object. But I wasn't a fallback. I wasn't a spare tire in their trunk of regrets. Later that evening, I lit a candle in my kitchen. Not for ambience, but for control. I sat down, looked at my laptop, and uploaded the file to a public timestamp ledger. the kind used by small creators to protect intellectual property without a lawyer on standby. They couldn't unmake what I'd made. Not this time. I was done playing the role they'd written for me. If I was ever meant to be their backup plan, they should have asked what happens when the backup learns to walk away. The envelope was still warm from the printer when I slid it into my work bag and zipped it shut. It felt strange, walking around with something so small that carried so much weight, a document they would never expect me to have, proof that I'd drawn the line. I didn't send it right away. I just carried it, like a reminder. Monday came like any other. Coffee burned my tongue, the elevator was slow, and I barely made it to my desk before the first call came in. But it wasn't from a client or a colleague. It was from my bank. Ms. Duval, we're calling about a past due payment on your Capital Link business account. This is the final notice before collections. I blinked at my screen. I don't have a business account with Capital Link. A pause. Then, this account was opened 16 months ago. Address listed is 2817 Dawson Avenue. That was my parents' address. Who signed the application? I asked, already knowing the answer. Another pause. Then, authorized signer, G. Rayner. I didn't yell, didn't curse. I just wrote everything down. After the call, I submitted a fraud report and requested a freeze on any accounts tied to my name. I asked for a case number. I didn't tell them who G. Rayner was. That afternoon, instead of working through emails, I went down the rabbit hole. I ran a public record search under my social security number. It took less than an hour to find what I needed. 3 business filings, all active, all tied to Dorian's food franchise network. 2 listed his name as the operator. 1 listed mine, as financial consultant of record. I hadn't signed anything. I hadn't seen a form. But there it was, in black and white, my name used like a tool. I stared at the screen so long my coffee went cold. Eventually, I closed the laptop. I didn't scream or break anything. The rage had become quieter by then, like a fever that stopped burning and started settling into your bones. That night, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned until the clock read 2:37 a.m., then gave up. I padded to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and sat at the table with the lights off. The glow from my laptop lit the space around me like a small stage. I didn't check email. I went back into the memory that had started resurfacing like a bruise under the skin. The day I graduated from business school. It had been drizzling. I wore a blue dress under my gown. The auditorium was packed with families holding flowers, balloons, handwritten signs. I had asked my parents to come. Velma had said they had a conflict. You know Dorian has his final baseball tournament. We can't be in 2 places at once. So they went to the game. And I walked across the stage alone. No camera, no bouquet, no applause. That night, I told myself they must have felt torn. That maybe they were proud, but just didn't show it like other families did. I cooked myself pasta and watched reruns of old sitcoms, laughing too loud in an empty room. But now, looking back, I didn't believe they were torn. I believed they made a choice, the same one they always made. The next morning, I got up early. Not for work. For me. I pulled every document I had into a new folder on my desktop. I named it Rayner Evidence. Inside, I saved the screenshots of the fraudulent business filings, the bank records, the voicemail transcripts. I even included the graduation photo I'd taken by myself, just in case I ever needed a reminder of how long this pattern had been in place. I didn't post anything online, didn't call anyone to rant. I just kept it. Proof isn't for everyone else. Sometimes it's just for you. To remember that you weren't crazy, that you didn't imagine the hurt, that your silence was survival, not permission. People talk a lot about breaking away from toxic families with long speeches and dramatic exits. But the truth is, the break often happens in quiet moments, while organizing files, freezing credit, or clicking Save on a folder you hope you never have to open again. Some people burn bridges. Others, like me, take a scalpel to the connection. Slow, deliberate, permanent. Some people break ties with words. Others do it with paper and patience. It started with a vibration on the nightstand. One buzz, then another. By the third, I knew something was wrong. It was early, barely 7 a.m., and I never got that many notifications unless something had exploded. I pulled the phone toward me and unlocked the screen. The first thing I saw was a Facebook post from my mother, public, filled with over 300 comments and dozens of shares. It was long, performative, drenched in that overly polite cruelty she'd mastered over the years. "We raised a daughter who forgot who raised her," it began. She went on to accuse me of turning my back on the family, of leaving Dorian in crisis, of prioritizing a corporate title over human decency. She described my refusal to co-sign his loan as a betrayal that cut deeper than any stranger could deliver. She even called me a product of selfish success. The part that broke whatever peace I'd constructed was a photo she included. Me, at age 6, sitting on Velma's lap, laughing. A caption beneath it read, "Before she thought she was better than us." She had tagged nearly every relative we had. And Dorian? He liked the post. I didn't respond. I didn't comment. I didn't text anyone. I took screenshots of every word. Not because I was planning to fight fire with fire, but because I had learned, finally, that truth needed records. By the time I arrived at work that morning, my hands were steady, but my chest was hollow. The receptionist looked at me longer than usual, as if trying to decide whether to say something. 10 minutes later, my manager knocked softly on my office door. "Do you have a moment?" I nodded. We stepped into the glass conference room. She closed the door behind us and gave me the kind of smile people use when they're about to talk around the real issue. "There's something we need to address. A client, Crescendo Capital, has asked to be reassigned to another consultant." I kept my face neutral. "They cited concerns about public image, something about a personal family matter going viral." I blinked once. "Okay." "I'm not taking you off any accounts," she added quickly, "but I need you to manage this quietly. No posts, no statements, just handle it." "I understand." She gave me a nod, then left. That was it. I went back to my desk, opened a blank document, and began building a file. I titled it, Contingency, Personal and Legal. Inside, I pasted every screenshot from the Facebook post. I added the business filings Dorian submitted using my name, the credit fraud complaint, the email from my bank confirming the investigation. I wasn't building a case for the court yet. I was building a shield, one they wouldn't see coming. I didn't post anything online. I didn't call Velma or Dorian. I didn't draft a paragraph of poetic justice, but I did send an internal memo to HR, complete with a timeline, supporting documents, and a short summary. If this ever interferes further with my professional standing, I'd like it known that I addressed it appropriately and quietly. That evening, back home, I set my laptop aside and stepped onto my small balcony. The air was cool. The world kept spinning. Just after 9 p.m., my phone rang again. "Velma!" I let it go to voicemail at first, but something told me to answer the second time. The call connected. Her voice was clipped, angry, sharp. "You could have ended all this, you know. You could have avoided everything if you'd just helped him." I didn't interrupt. "All we asked was for a little help. Your brother was drowning, and instead you threw us all under the bus. You're letting this family burn to the ground." I took a breath. Then I said, clearly, calmly, and without apology, "No. You lit this fire the moment you used my silence to protect your lies. If you're choking on smoke now, that's your consequence." She didn't say anything back. And for the first time, I ended the call. Not with rage, not with begging. Just a fingertip on a screen, and then peace. If you make a woman choose between her dignity and her family's approval, don't act surprised when she walks away with both. After the call ended, I sat still for a long while, the silence of my apartment stretching thick around me. I didn't cry. I didn't pace the floor like I used to. I just sat, letting the weight of her words sink somewhere I wouldn't carry them anymore. The next morning, I walked into my lawyer's office in uptown Charlotte with a tote bag full of proof and a spine stiffer than concrete. The receptionist looked up and gave me a polite nod, but I could tell by her eyes she'd read something about me online. Didn't matter. I wasn't here for their opinion. I was here for precision. "You ready?" my lawyer asked as I sat across from her. "Completely," I said. I placed everything on the table, printed screenshots of the defamation post, documentation from the identity theft report, the fraudulent business filings with my name, copies of emails that painted a clear picture of calculated misuse. She flipped through the stack, page after page. Her expression never changed. That was what I liked about her. No performance, just process. "This isn't just defamation or misuse of information," she said finally. "This is systemic, coordinated. They knew exactly what they were doing." I nodded. "Then it's time to draw lines they can't cross again." She laid out the plan. File for civil protection over my personal financial identity. Start an official fraud case. Notify the Secretary of State's office about the forged filings. Nothing dramatic, just facts. Clean, surgical, like removing a tumor. 3 days later, I got an email from my Aunt Cecilia, my father's older sister. We hadn't spoken in years. She'd always been quiet at gatherings, the kind of woman who watched more than she spoke. She invited me to her home, not a text, not a phone call, an actual handwritten letter on thick stationery, postmarked with intention. I drove out on a cloudy Saturday, past trees that had started to hint at fall. Her house was small, neat, filled with the scent of cloves and something baking. She greeted me at the door with a quiet hug and led me to the kitchen. No small talk, no ice-breaking, just tea, silence, and something heavy waiting between us. "I need to give you something," she said after we sat. She reached into a drawer and pulled out a large manila envelope. Inside was a notarized letter, a will, my grandfather's. It read in unmistakable handwriting, "My shares in the Boone property are to go to Marlene Leahy Duval, who stayed with me and never asked for anything. She is the only one who sat with me in silence and didn't need to be the center of the room to be the heart of it." I stared at the paper for a long moment. "You knew?" I finally asked, voice low. Cecilia gave me a slow nod. "Your parents were supposed to tell you. They didn't. I stayed out of it too long." "Why now?" "Because silence only serves the liar, not the lied to." She didn't apologize. I respected that. She wasn't trying to feel better. She was trying to make it right. 2 days later, I met my parents at their attorney's office. Neutral territory, round table, bottled water no one opened. Velma wore beige and that expression that always said, "We're the victims here." Gideon started, "Look, we all want peace. Let's not make this uglier than it needs to be." I opened my folder slowly and laid out the will first, then the credit fraud report, then the filings. I didn't speak until they had read enough to know what they were looking at. "You already made it ugly," I said, voice steady. "I'm just giving it structure." Velma's eyes flickered. "That will's invalid." "Not according to state law, and not with that seal." Gideon leaned forward. "We didn't mean to hurt you. You've always been so strong, Marlene. We thought you didn't need all this." "You were wrong," I said simply. "And now I'm done cleaning up after your messes." I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't beg them to understand. After I left, I went home and opened my laptop. I started drafting a statement. Not a rant, not revenge, just a timeline, a record. Because I was done letting them write the story and leaving me out of it. They called it a family feud. I called it correction. The kind only truth can deliver. The morning of the court filing, I stood in front of the mirror longer than usual. No mascara, no lipstick. I didn't want to look polished. I wanted to look like someone who'd endured and still showed up. I took a rideshare to the courthouse downtown, left my car behind on purpose. I didn't want to fight with parking or show up flustered. I wanted quiet steps, intentional ones, the kind people take when they're not running from anything. At security, I placed my bag on the conveyor belt. The metal detector beeped, twice. The guard waved it off like he knew, like he'd seen enough women walking in with fire in their veins. Upstairs, courtroom 3 was half empty. No cameras, no reporters. Just a judge, a clerk, and a few rows of chairs, 2 of which held Velma and Gideon, both dressed like they were attending a retirement brunch. I didn't greet them. I sat alone, second row. When my name was called, I stepped forward. The filing wasn't dramatic, no gavel slamming, just paperwork. A request for severance of liability, my name formally removed from any future legal connection to the family trust, the business Dorian attached me to, and all linked corporate accounts. The judge reviewed the documents without much expression, then simply said, "Motion granted." That was it. No confetti, no apologies, just a stamp, a seal, a break. As I turned to leave, I passed by Velma and Gideon. They didn't move. They didn't speak, just stared like I'd stepped out of a mold they never imagined breaking. Outside, I pulled in a deep breath and let it out slow. It was freedom without fireworks, the kind that makes space where shame used to live. 2 weeks later, I sat in a small podcast studio in Denver. I didn't promote it. I didn't ask anyone to listen. But when Elena Matisse, the host, invited me to speak about what happens when loyalty becomes a leash, I agreed. We didn't prep much. I didn't bring notes. She asked gentle questions, and I answered, clearly, without drama, without trying to make anyone the villain. I spoke about the internship I gave up, about the bike that never got ridden, about the invisible line between support and control, and how easy it is for families to blur it. I told her, they didn't just overlook me, they used me, quietly, because they thought I'd never say anything loud enough for the world to hear. She leaned forward slightly, nodded once, and whispered, "And now?" I looked straight ahead. Now I speak. The episode went live 3 days later. By the end of the week, someone reposted screenshots of Velma's Facebook post. Yes, the one accusing me of being heartless, alongside a clip of me talking about being manipulated into silence. I didn't do it. I didn't have to. The internet did what it does. A ripple became a wave. People commented, debated, shared their own stories. Someone from Dorian's investor group backed out. Another delayed their next payment. My parents never issued a statement, but they shut down the franchise's website for maintenance. The Yelp page quietly disappeared. I didn't gloat, didn't celebrate. I worked. I cooked dinner. I walked my dog in the evenings. Until one night, around 6:45, I got a voicemail. It was my father. No shouting, no defense, just tired words. "We didn't know you felt all of that. We're sorry you saw us that way." That way. Like my experience was a perspective. Optional, subjective, inconvenient. I didn't call back, but I didn't delete it either. It stayed on my phone. Like a scar you no longer cover up, but you don't press either. Later that evening, I sat on my small balcony, Denver sky bleeding from gold to lavender. My dog curled beside me, snoring softly, chest rising and falling like everything in him was unbothered. I watched the horizon shift and thought about how much I had tried to earn love from people who only offered it conditionally. I hadn't left my family. I had left the version of me they felt entitled to control, and I wasn't going back to her. By the time October settled into Denver like a soft coat, my life had thinned out in the most beautiful way. I wasn't trying to explain myself anymore. I wasn't drafting statements or gathering documents. My silence was no longer a defense. It was just peace. I woke up to the sound of birds near the window, the kind you only hear if you've stopped filling your mornings with noise. I walked my dog through the neighborhood park, a mug of coffee in hand, wrapped in an old hoodie. I passed a couple whispering harshly near a bench, their frustration familiar, but no longer mine. A boy rode past us on a bike too big for him. He wobbled, laughed at himself, and kept going. Something in that made me smile. I didn't check emails. I didn't think about whether anyone from back home was watching. No conference calls, no brand optics, no fire to put out. Just me, breathing, moving, existing in a city that didn't know my history and didn't expect me to carry it like a badge. Later that afternoon, I sat at my desk with a half-full mug beside me, going through a few lingering work tasks. The quiet was soft, not heavy. It held me rather than pressed on me. Then a notification pinged. New message. Subject line. I should have said something back then. It was from my uncle, Ronald Fain, my father's younger brother. I clicked, expecting a forwarded joke or some awkward small talk. But it was 3 paragraphs of truth. He wrote that he had known for years that I was left off the trust, that he'd seen my name missing from the filings, the dinners, the plans. He said he thought about speaking up once, but didn't want to get in the middle of family decisions, and that he regretted staying silent. I know it's late, and maybe it doesn't count for much, but I see what you did, and I'm proud of you, Marlene. I didn't reply. But I read it 3 times, and I didn't delete it. That evening, I stopped by the grocery store to pick up a few things for dinner. In the produce aisle, I saw a young woman, probably early 30s, standing next to an older lady who kept correcting everything she put in the cart. "Do you really need all that pasta? You're always going overboard with cheese." Every word was just soft enough to pass as concern, just sharp enough to make your spine shrink. I saw the woman's face, trying to smile, trying to not react, trying to keep the peace that never really belonged to her. For a moment, I almost said something. I almost reached across that invisible line and said, "You don't owe her silence." But I didn't. I just gave her a kind look as I walked by. A nod that said, "I see you, I was you." She didn't nod back, but I think she felt it. I went home and started prepping dinner for a few friends. Nothing elaborate. Roasted vegetables, homemade soup, a bit of wine. I turned on a playlist I loved but never used around my family. "Too emo," they once said. My dog curled up near the patio door, snoring like clockwork. When everyone arrived, we ate on the rooftop. The sun was folding into dusk, painting the city in soft amber. We talked about books, bad dates, second chances. We didn't bring up my family or what had happened. That part of me didn't need explaining anymore. At one point, someone asked, "Do you ever miss home?" I didn't hesitate. Not really. I miss the idea of it. But I'm living something real now. We clinked glasses. No framed portraits of parents on the wall. No legacy of sacrifice I didn't agree to. Just laughter. Soft music, shared food. A life I built. Not to prove anything, but because I was finally free to choose it. Peace isn't loud, it doesn't make announcements. But when it arrives, and you know you earned it, it hums through your bones like a second heartbeat.